But what I'd like to do now is invite our speaker to share his screen. And as by way of introduction, some of you may know Dr. Alan Rushworth, who is a director at the Archaeological Practice in Newcastle, so they're archaeological consultants. And in terms of the connection with WallCAP, due to COVID, our project had an extension of 9 months, and we had some underspend, and we really wanted to push that money into this village atlas work, which is a methodology we'd heard of as a project, but we didn't have the capacity to deliver it. So we outsourced this part of the project, and the Archaeological Practice, who have a lot of experience of village atlases, of which you will become expert within the next hour, I'm sure. They've done a lot of work with these, developing these before. So we're delighted that Alan's been able to join us tonight to take us through the process over the last few months of the village atlas methodology, and also moving on to what the final village atlases will look like. So I'm just going to hand straight over to Alan, who will take us through what the Village Atlas project has been all about. Thanks, Alan.
Right, good evening, everyone. Yes, tonight I'll be talking about the 6 village atlases we're doing with communities along Hadrian's Wall. So the first question you're probably asking is, what is a village atlas? And essentially it's a holistic study of a community, and we try and engage members of the community in the production of this study, and the end product is a report which can cover many themes. So we work with people, we provide a little bit of training in sort of test pitting, or how to use archives, and a whole series of things which we'll see as we go through. So the coverage can vary. Archaeology and history is always included, but some of the ones we've done have included geology, biodiversity, and hydrology. These were particularly ones we did in County Durham, in East Durham, for the limestone landscapes landscape partnership. But most of them have been more archaeological and historically focused. So the broad sources of information we use are the historic environment record, which is the basic archaeological site record for any particular area. Historic maps, old photographs, documents, LiDAR and aerial photographs, geological maps, and if relevant, biodiversity data and such like. And we look at surviving historic buildings and archaeological monuments, and we try and analyze the landscape around the village using historic maps and the surviving features such as ridge and furrow. And sometimes this involves in analysing townscapes as well, because some of the villages we've done have effectively turned into towns later in their histories, places like Heddon and Ferry Hill and Easington. So you're dealing with an urban landscape by the end. So these are a series of typical village atlas activities, some of which I mentioned. Sometimes we work with schools. We usually do some guided walks. We've done quite a lot of oral history, and then sometimes a little bit of excavation, test pitting, this kind of thing. Now the output has usually been a large report, sometimes very large report, made a satisfying thunk on the table, and sometimes that has a kind of the members of the study group, the local people who've been working with us, contribute substantial sections to that, and this was the case in Gunnerton and Barrasford, at Heddon, where the end report was a huge book, probably about 2/3 of which was produced by members of the group themselves. But with the limestone landscapes one, we produced some summary reports as well. These were just around 40 pages, in effect edited highlights, and we did that for for the Bishop Wearmouth Atlas that we completed in 2021 as well, although that was a little longer, that was about 80 pages. But and these are kind of very user-friendly summaries. So the WallCAP village atlases cover 6 sites along Hadrian's Wall: Byker and Ouseburn, Benwell, Heddon on the Wall, Gilsland, Walton, and Bowness and Solway. So there's a fairly neat distribution there. There's basically 3 in Tyne and Wear and Northumberland, and then 3 in Cumberland, although Gilsland spans the Cumbrian Northumbrian border. The duration of these atlases is rather shorter than normal. So we started work really in February, and they're due to come to completion at the end of September this year. Normally we'd run for a full year, and very often there's quite a bit of finishing off after that. So I mean, 2 years is kind of a good span on an atlas. It allows you to embed yourself in the community more, but a year is typical, but these are shorter than that. And consequently, we've had a reduced number of meetings and events. Essentially, we had a launch event with what we call an in-gathering session, which was when we encourage people to bring in documents, photographs, that kind of thing, which we scan or photograph, and we kind of tacked a guided walk onto that meeting as well. Then we've had a test pitting event in each village, which was very successful, and there'll be a final event to celebrate the completion of the village atlases. So it's a much more truncated event kind of program. The atlases will covering history, archaeology, and geology. So no biodiversity in this one. And the output will be just a summary report. And in many respects, I kind of feel that the summary reports are the way to go. The full reports were very exhaustive, but also quite exhausting, and I think for some people to read as well. And I think the summary reports are actually, for the vast majority of users, cover pretty much everything that they would require. The length, as I say, the ones we did for the limestone landscapes atlases were about 40 pages long. You can produce anything up to 100 pages without much extra effort. You can just put more maps in and that kind of thing. So it's not, but these will probably be closer to the limestone landscapes in length, just because of the resource we have to spend on it. A crucial thing in understanding the village atlas model is that we don't just study the village settlement itself. It's a village isn't just a dot on a map, an isolated settlement. Typically, all the communities that we study are established as medieval villages. They're farming communities in origin, and they have a designated tract of landscape attached to them, historically known as a vill, or more commonly as a township in more recent times. These are these are effectively the landscape resource that these communities have exploited over time. So to understand what those people are doing, you have to see what they're doing in the surrounding landscape. So this is Bowness as an example, with the village in one corner, but then we can see how, the extent of the township that the people of that community exploited over time, and you can see it's quite substantial. And these are both from the first edition Ordnance Survey maps. These are just some other examples of, well, Heddon, in fact, showing the township as mapped out. So the kind of the best guide as to the township, its limits, as the first edition ordnance survey, which was just seen for Bowness, and also the tide maps, which were typically done arranged by township. Sometimes a whole all the townships for a whole parish would be grouped together with a series of maps, but very often they're just produced as individual townships within the parish of, well, in this case, of Heddon. And sometimes there are discrepancies between the boundaries that the tide maps record and the boundaries that the ordnance survey maps, which follow on about 20 years later, typically, the boundaries that they record. And you could, you know, if you had more time, you could doubtless, send yourself mad by trying to investigate why that was the case. And which, but what happens, of course, is that the ordnance survey becomes the definitive source. So whether it was right or wrong, it becomes right because no one argues with it in the end. And then we take this outline and we mark it on all the maps that we produce thereafter. So you can see it outlined on the current ordnance survey map here for Heddon as well. So in terms of the data that we've compiled for these atlases, the crucial source is the historic environment record, as I said. And you can see here Benwell, the sites in Benwell Township, compiled from the HER. They're on the maps with them, they're color coded, so red is Roman, and as you can see, because there's a Roman fort there and lots of Roman finds, there's a huge cluster of Roman pinky red Roman ones, and not really that much else. A few medieval, some post-medieval, but a few, I think maybe one or two prehistoric, probably just stone axe finds. So the prehistory of Benwell is something of a mystery, and considering it's now built over, the opportunities for finding out more are somewhat limited. I mean, it'd just be a case of serendipity if an excavation was to turn up a prehistoric site within this area. There's no way of predicting by studying the landscape where such sites might be. But the medieval are important because this is, this relates directly to the village of Benwell. Because the villages we're studying tend to originate in the Middle Ages. Another source is the LiDAR. This is, I mean, these are, kind of, you can stare at these for hours and hours, just working out features. And this is the stretch for the area just east of Gilsland village, between Gilsland and Thirlwall, in effect, so between Gilsland and Thirlwall Castle. And you can see the influence of the Roman wall coming through here. You see the linear, here is the Hadrian's wall with its ditch, and then behind to the south you have the Vallum, and lots of little rectangular temporary camps, marching camps or construction camps that were used during the building of the wall, and also traces of landscape management, field cut fields, field boundaries, and successive layers. So we've got one field boundary that comes, a long field boundary immediately south of the Vallum, but that's overlain midway along by a more recent area of ploughing and land management. So these are a way of investigating the landscape and plotting out successive phases. Historic maps are, alongside the HER, probably our most important source. And this is the map of the Manor of Benwell, one of the nicest maps that we'll include in the atlas. It's dated to 1637. It reproduced from the Northumberland County History that was published in the 1920s. There are 3 original copies in the National Archives, but they're too big and unwieldy to actually copy, unfortunately. So we'll have to make do with this, which is a very good copy, but it's all that's really available. And you can see in the centre Benwell village, and then the line of the wall comes through to the north of that. Mark the wall, and it's a kind of orange line. Historic documents. Most of this we incorporate from the county histories, which provide a summary of source material, but there are some which have been printed and published, particularly by the Surtees Society. And one of these is the Lanercost Cartulary, which relates to Walton village, and this first appears in documents in as a grant to Lanercost Priory, which is founded by the Lord of Gilsland, Robert de Vaux, in the late 12th century, and he grants the Bill of Walton to the priory, and sets out the bounds of the vill, or the township. And this equates, these can be mapped out on our survey, as I've scribbled on this sheet to the side. And the green area, the green outline in the bottom of the later township is the extent of the grant, as far as one can work out. And then later grants were made, which are recorded in the cartulary, which cover adjacent areas. And it's the combination of these which creates ultimately the 2 townships of Low Walton and High Walton. Basically, and you can see how that unit came together in stages in the Middle Ages. So these are particularly nice documents, actually. Historic photographs. I think some views of Bowness on Solway. Basically, we're relying really here on local, people who've collected, already collected views of their village. So the Heddon History Society has a collection. Individuals in Bowness and Gilsland and such like also have collections. So these are what we're principally relying on. Purely because of the pressure of time. We don't have time with this accelerated timetable to do a lot of work collecting these, but they can they bring the village, the past of the village to life if you have some nice postcards or photographs. Analysing historic buildings, basically Peter Ryder, who's one of North of England's foremost historic buildings experts, has been ferried around all of the villages now and has produced summaries of his thoughts about the individual village buildings and the churches, and any interesting bits of stonework which have cropped up in the churchyards and such like. So they'll be incorporated in the Atlas report. And geology, Ian Kill is doing the geology for us. So he's been working with WallCAP all the way through, trying to source stone for the where the stone in Hadrian's wall might have come from, at any point along it. he's also, you know, looked at some of the buildings in the villages and seen where their sources of stone have come from. And it tends to be very local sandstones. Of course, in a place like Heddon, which is basically one ginormous quarry for much of its history, most of the stone is coming very locally, and indeed. But the same is true on the west side of the country. You're getting a lot of the local red sandstones and such like. And test pitting. We've done test pitting in every village. The examples I'm showing you here are from Walton, where we had the opportunity to work with the pupils of Walton and Lees Hill Primary School, and that was it was great fun. So we basically dug a number. In that case, we dug in the green. Elsewhere, such as Heddon, we dug in people's gardens. Gilsland, again, they were scattered around in people's gardens. Benwell, we had a couple of locations, more targeted. One, we were trying to investigate the medieval village, and another group, we were trying to look for the Roman bathhouse. I have to say, with signal lack of success. I think we may have got the odd sherd of medieval pottery from the one in Benwell, in the village area, but yes, the Romans proved elusive in all of our test pits, I think. And Byker, again, we dug in a targeted area looking for the line of the wall, but really there's, as we half expected, there's been so much landscaping and industrial activity there that you're pretty much digging into later infill. But each group of finds will be photographed, and will include examples in the report. Oops. Going on to kind of the results that we all this work has produced. There are a number of themes and topics and areas where we can contrast and compare the villages, and these are just, I mean, these are basically just a few themes. I mean, you could go on and on. There are so many different topics you could talk about, but these are just some I've plucked out to avoid us being here until next month. So first of all, the Romans, who have left quite a legacy along the wall, and then we can go on to look at how the creation of the wall and its remnants have influenced the development of the villages or not, and that in turn takes us into village plans, and we can look at those which have parish churches. And then there's just, some more recent themes: transport, the impact of the arrival of railways on some of the villages, collieries, and also I look at Gilsland, which is not a medieval village settlement, and so it's a special case, and we'll just look at that in a little more detail. So first of all, the Roman legacy. A number of the village settlements have Roman forts within the bounds of their township. So Benwell has the fort of Condurcum to the north of the village settlement. At Walton, there's Camberglana, Castlesteads to the west, southwest, and Bowness, of course, is built on top of a Roman fort. And in a varying amount of work has been done in each of these cases. So let's see. So Benwell has had a lot of excavation over a very extended period. So you've got a very convincing looking plan of the bathhouse done by Robert Shafto in around the mid 18th century. There's some suggestion it's kind of a mirror image of what it should be, but it certainly looks quite accurate. And then we go right up until the recent excavations that my company did at Dorcas Avenue in the Vicus to the south of the fort, uncovering stone buildings, strip buildings as they're known, but also big storehouses and possibly coal sheds and warehouses. And the suggestion being that the Romans are exploiting coal in this area. And there's been a lot of work in the fort itself, and immediately around, revealing the Temple of Antinokiticus and the crossing of the Balam Causeway, and two of the principal sites. Other sites, other forts have received less attention. So Castlesteads, there hasn't been much work in the fort, largely because it's the gardens of a country, the big house of the area. But you can see the geophysical survey work that was done outside the fort has revealed much of the Vicus. You can see these enclosures and buildings lining the roads approaching the fort. And so it's obvious that Walton isn't the first village in this area. There was a substantial village, probably significantly larger than Walton, here in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Such villages typically go out at the end of the 3rd century, and settlement then concentrates within the fort walls. So this is probably in use for about 200 years or somewhat less. And then we have a number of inscriptions from pretty much all the village sites, but the particularly ones where there are forts, and these tell you a lot about the garrison, and sometimes the Bicani, the people who are living in the village outside. So we know the units that were stationed at Castlesteads, the Cohos Secunda Tungrorum, and at Benwell. But Bowness, we don't. It's one of the few forts along Hadrian's Wall where, although we've got inscriptions, they don't mention the unit. We know it was a large cohort, probably 1,000 men, with a mixture of infantry and some cavalry, but we don't know the name of the unit. So, I mean, it's not just those villages that have forts nearby that have important monuments. There's the Mile Castle close to Gilsland, Mile Castle 48. There's a Mile Castle right beside Walton, although its precise location is uncertain. It used to be thought we knew exactly where it was, but it may not be quite where we thought it was. And Byker, there's towers and mile castles in the vicinity. But all this Roman activity and construction activity has in some cases left an enduring legacy, but not in every case. In the case of Byker, this village settlement largely ignored the wall. It's situated well to the south in the center of its township, which doesn't even use the wall as its northern boundary, which is sometimes the case. That the walls are a continuing landscape feature, so it often made sense to incorporate it as at least part of a township boundary, but not in this case. As we can see here, you can see the line of the wall cutting through the northern part of the township, and as you know, effectively the line of West Road, the West Road follows it today. The same is largely true of Byker. This is a map of 1769-67, and the line of the wall is, hopefully you can see my cursor, but it comes through just below the little cartouche at the top. It's this line that continues through, and for part of its length, it does form the boundary of Byker Township. But then as you get further east, there's this rectangular protrusion beyond it. So, and again, the village is situated well to the south of the wall. So clearly, when these village settlements were set up, they're really sited as much as anything for convenience within these landscape parcels that they're exploiting. And there's no particular benefit to being on the wall. Right. However, some villages do situate themselves right by the wall. So Heddon, in top right corner here, butts right up against it. And how that exactly how it related to it is somewhat confused today by the creation of the military road, the turnpike that was built in the mid 18th century. So that's largely removed a lot of the remains of the wall, particularly through the village, and and then the Hexham turnpike as well. So these are kind of to some degree confused exactly how the village might relate to the wall, but it's clear that it kind of backs up against the south side of the wall in some way. And the same is true of Walton. Here we see McLaughlin in the bottom left corner. You've got McLaughlin's plan of the Roman remains passing through the area, which he part of his survey, which he did in 1857. So the red line is the line of Hadrian's wall with its ditch. The orange line is orangey brown line is the line of the vallum, and you can see the Walton is in the top center of the map, sort of backing on against the north side in this case of the wall. It doesn't appear to extend over the other side of the wall. So it's the wall kind of forms a limit of the settlement. But it's noteworthy that the village isn't located over the Roman fort, which here is actually Camberglanna, but was initially thought to be called Petriana. So you can see that in the bottom left corner of the map. And then, of course, you've got Bowness, which sits on top of the fort and extends, outside it as well, particularly to the east and also to the south. And so it's this is, in many ways, this is the most fascinating one, because in this case, the remains of the fort must have had a direct impact on the layout of the later settlement, and it looks as though the village street is following the main road into the fort, the Via Praetoria, and the road south is kind of related to the Via Principalis, but it seems to have shifted a little to the east, as you can see from the position of the south gate in the map in the top right corner. We can see that the streets have slightly shifted position. So we can speculate how that might have played out. This brings us on to village plans generally, and this is one of the elements of when we do a village atlas, trying to work out what the earlier form of the village was before modern changes and developments. Typically the earliest map we've got is often the tithe map or the first edition Ordnance Survey. So we don't, in many cases, we can't take the layout of the village back that far. In the case of a number of the villages we're doing here, we've got plans that go back into the 18th century, and even in the case of Benwell, the 17th, but that's quite unusual. But villages have been the subject of a great deal of research, particularly by Professor Brian Roberts at Durham, who's kind of analysed the plans, kind of put them into systematic types, and analyze their individual components. So, I mean, this is just one example from County Durham, Midridge, and it's distinguished because it survived. The original layout survived relatively well when it was mapped by the first editions. So what's known as a regular 2-row village with a green village with a large rectangular green, and then on either side you have the village tenements, you might call them, with their little enclosures known as toffs. So the houses would front onto the green as they do here, and then each house is effectively a farm originally, and they would have their little garden plots behind, and then possibly crofts attached to the rear of those, and then their shares of arable land in the open fields beyond. So this is just gives us a quick overview of the villages that we have. 5 of the villages anyway, the older villages that we have in the WallCAP study. So and we have a mixture of row villages in the case of Benwell and Byker, relatively regular, and what are known as agglomerations, where it's much harder to pick out regularity, in Heddon and Walton, and then Bowness, which may be something of a row village, but it's it's kind of slightly distorted by the fact that it's built on the wall and built in over the fort, which has affected its layout. So Benwell, we've got quite a number of early maps for Benwell, not just the 1637 one at the top right here, but also some probably early 18th century plans, and then the tithe map, and then the first edition Ordnance Survey that we have here. And it's clear that what we're dealing with here is rather like Midridge. It has it's basically oriented east-west. It has a north and south row with a green between, and then at the east end there's a manor house, Benwell Tower, which was fortified, included a large tower, and also a chapel there as well. So the chapel would be attached to the manor. So we can see, particularly in the bottom one, you can see the tower and the chapel drawn rather schematically, but that shows how it was organised. And then possibly another large house at the west end as well will emerge at some point. And this was still the case when the first edition was compiled in the 1850s. You can see still 2 rows, and you can still make out elements of that on in the street plan today. It's still basically a road going through where the green was previously, and there's rows of buildings on either side. Although the layout of toffs and crofts has all gone by, been obliterated by more recent development. On the other hand, Walton and Heddon are much less regular, and it's harder to see regular rows within them. Look at Walton on the left. The first edition Ordnance Survey, quite a few of the buildings on this are relatively recent. The parochial school, the building adjacent to it, the Walton Cottage to the south of the school, and these may well be encroachment of what was originally a large green attached to the village. The main cluster of early settlement seems to be to the south, butting up against the wall, and obviously, and you've got the church immediately to the north on the east side of the green, and the building, one of the buildings in the greens also seems to be a 17th century alehouse, and it's one can speculate that that originated as the common brew house of the medieval village, conceivably, which was sited in the common green, as such common facilities often were. So it may be that originally you had a cluster south end and a straggler of buildings going up the east side of the what is now the village, petering out somewhere beyond the churchyard. Heddon, again, the central focus is the church and its churchyard in the on the summit of the hill, and then there's kind of a green area around that, which is being rapidly encroached upon by the time of our earliest maps. So this one is done shortly before the Ordnance Survey and shows a lot of potential encroachment about to occur on the green areas. And the tithe maps that similarly slightly earlier, echoes this. It's possible that we have a row along the south side, facing the churchyard, and then obviously there's certain linear development along the road to Hexham, but that could be later, and possibly some buildings backing onto the line of the wall. There's a whole row of cottages along the east side of the village, but these are relatively recently built by Clayton, and it's not clear what was there prior to that. We'd need more research to work that out, and probably an earlier detailed map than we possess. This brings us on to villages which have parish churches. 3 of our villages have an ancient parish church within them: Heddon, Bowness, and Walton. And these ultimately date back to the Middle Ages, although Walton has been rebuilt several times in the 19th century, so very little medieval survives there, although some medieval carved stonework has been found. Bowness is a late 12th century building in origin, with nice Norman arches. You can see on the left-hand side of the composite there the north door, which was probably the main doorway into the church originally. And Heddon even goes back to the Middle Ages. We can see to the Anglo-Saxon period. You can see here the black bits are surviving Anglo-Saxon stonework, although more of the surviving structure is Norman, with these the arches in the chancel, these dogtooth mouldings you can see on the photograph, and then later periods of medieval work as well. So it goes through many rebuilds in the course of its long history. And here we see Bowness. Similarly, we can see originally probably just a single kind of rectangular structure with no kind of clearly separated chancel, which is unusual, but it certainly has surviving late Norman elements, late 12th century, including the font we can see here, which is a very nice piece of work. We have earlier stonework surviving from Walton, 10th to 11th century crosshead found during grave digging back in 1949. And this is now been moved back into the church itself to protect it. But there's also a later medieval grave slab was we noticed when we visited the site. So that's Peter's recorded that as well. So so this is the earliest. The crosshead is the earliest evidence for occupation at Walton. It's earlier than the documentary evidence, which starts with the gift grant to Lanercost Cartulary, which I quoted earlier. So this is the advantage of discoveries like this, that you get earlier evidence than any written document can tell you, particularly as there is no doomsday record for our area, Cumberland and Northumberland. So we are, and unless the village falls within the lands that belong to Durham Cathedral, in the community of St Cuthbert, as it was known, which originated at Lindisfarne but then moved down to Durham, and that's managed to preserve a continuous sequence and documentary sequence, recording its land holdings. So villages in those areas tend to crop up earlier than ones outside it, but none of ours fall within that category. So the fact that there is no documentary evidence for them doesn't mean they weren't in existence. It just means that they're, in effect, they're almost prehistoric, because they're not important enough to figure in the records that we do have for the early Middle Ages, such as they are. Now, Gilsland, I haven't mentioned much hitherto because it's a rather special case. There was no medieval nucleated village at Gilsland. It originates as a territory. Gilsland originally is the name of a large territory, a barony. In fact, it derives from it effectively means Gilly's land. Gilly is a guy who appears in the early 12th century. He's active at Carlisle when David, King of Scotland, holds Cumberland for a while. And he basically holds out in this part of the northern border, really kind of not very little under the control of the Norman kings, until basically the mid 12th century, when Henry II, the first Angevin king, seizes most of his land. He allows him to keep Bewcastle to the north, but we can see this huge tract of land here, which becomes the southern 3/4 becomes the barony of Gilsland, and then there's Bewcastle to the north. And again, this map, and this is map of 1590 done for Lord Burleigh to help him keep an eye on the northern border. And then we have this, the barony still exists in in the 18th century, and we have this map of 1774 which shows the extent of the barony. And Gilsland is tucked right on the edge of this, the modern settlement of Gilsland. And really straddles the border of Cumberland and Northumberland. And there weren't really nucleated village settlements in this part of Northumberland and Cumberland. What you have are a series of scattered farmsteads and hamlets. So this is the Thirlwall township, which takes up about half the area of modern Gilsland, and really the only structure we can identify on the site of the present village is Thirlwall Mill, which we know exactly where that was, where the Poltros burn flows into the Irthing, and then there are a number of farmsteads one or two immediately outside the present village, which crop up in medieval documents, the Black Book of Hexham Priory, and then later in documentation which records settlement in the 16th century. A lot of it, there's a lot of royal documentation for that period, when the royal authorities are very concerned about what's happening on the northern border, the deteriorating security there reapers and raiding and all that. So we have a number of surveys which name some of the farmsteads that exist at that time, but it's clear that there's no village, and there's no village around Thirlwall Castle itself. And the area Gilsland itself is effectively split between three townships: Thirlwall, over Denton, and then areas attached to Lanercost to the northwest. So it's something of a mix, and effectively it's split between three parishes as well. So it has no integral status at this stage, and this is still the case in the 18th century. We can see here, this is the Cumberland side, and there's a farmstead called the Shores, which is mentioned certainly back in the 16th century, and Mumps Hall, which seems to be a kind of inn, and it's where the judges lodged when they were on their itineraries, sort of going from Newcastle, say, to Carlisle. So there's a number of farmsteads, Orchard House, the Shores, Mumps Hall, but no village on the Cumbrian side either. What changes this is really a conjunction of two things. Firstly, Walter Scott, who visited the area. There's a spar which is going to the north of the Shores on the Cumbrian side of the border. You can just see it in the bend of towards the top end of this map here. So there's Chalybeate Spar, and then a hotel was built to serve guest visitors to that spar. And he visits the area, and he proposes to his wife on the popping stones, which are in the earthing, and then he includes it in one of his novels, Guy Mannering, and this creates interest, a little mini Victorian tourist boom. But that, to facilitate that tourist boom, required a second event, which was the creation of the Newcastle and Carlisle Railway in the 1830s. This is you have the map, the survey map that was done for it. Part of its, the statutory plans that were submitted for the Act of Parliament, and then the station buildings still survived, although the station was closed in 1967, unfortunately. But this originally, it was called Rose Hill, not Gilsland, because there was no Gilsland settlement. But as settlement mushroomed over the second half of the 19th century, the name acquired, the settlement acquired the name Gilsland. So we see by the end of the 19th century here, there is quite a few buildings along the main road, and then either side of the railway line, and then you get into the outlying farmsteads beyond Crooks and Gap, and of which there are still a great many. So this is really the formation of Gilsland. So the fact that there was no village there doesn't mean there's no archaeology or no history, and there is quite a lot of it, but it's not organized around a single settlement. So it proves that even quite late settlement, lately created settlements can still have quite an interesting past. Just to round up, just a couple of other brief themes we'll cover briefly. First of all, collieries. This is very important at the eastern end of our transect, as it were, around Byker and Benwell, and these are going quite early on. You can see this is a map of the late 1590s, and all these along the Ouseburn, you've got a series of pits coming down to little loading staves, and again, there's a few pits in the area of Benwell as well, and these spread to Heddon as well. So here we have, and this just shows pits still surviving in the mid 19th century. So it's long running coal activity, probably from the Middle Ages onwards, really. Coal mining around Newcastle is mentioned in documents quite early on, and the proximity to the river and it allows coal to be moved by keel boats and such like, and loaded onto ships at Newcastle or at the mouth of the Tyne. And we also see here, of course, the Newcastle and Carlisle Railway running along the southern edge of Benwell township. Again, fairly newly created by that stage. And that brings us to the impact of improving transport links in on our villages. And nowhere is this kind of more dramatically illustrated than by Bowness, where we don't simply have a railway, we actually have a canal. There are no canals really in the northeast of England. The early development of wagonways and railways kind of, and the lack of suitable rivers stymied them really. But we do have a canal that ran from Carlisle to Port Carlisle, which was created relatively late, opened by the 1830s, almost as the railways were about to supplant it. But it has its little heyday when it's after the Newcastle and Carlisle railway opens. That opens up the coal mines in the Brampton area, and then they're shipped onto ships which travel along the Carlisle Canal. But it became unviable, and it's replaced by a railway line which falls into the hands of the North British Railway, and it becomes a kind of minor branch very quickly, because the port really isn't the water around the port isn't really deep enough, so they switch. Their main branch line ends up at Silloth, where they build a new port. But there are still surviving, essentially Port Carlisle is a creation of this spasm, first of the canal and then of the little railway line. But it doesn't keep steam engines for very long. The Port Carlisle branch is so unimportant that they end up running it with a horse-drawn carriage running on the rails, known as the Dandy. And this is can still be seen in the National Railway Museum in York, and there are many photographs of it. It eventually was shut in about 1914 and replaced by steam engines, but only for a very relatively short period. It shut again. It shut completely in the 1930s. So yeah, the most impressive structure of all, of course, was the Solway viaduct, again around in vicinity of Bowness. And Bowness gets a railway station of its own, although it's not actually in the village. And this railway is built to move iron ore from the West Cumbrian ore fields up to Scotland. But it's a huge infrastructure creation, which had a relatively short life. So it's built in the 1870s, and by 50 years later, it's been closed because the ore fields are being worked out, and the markets after the First World War are collapsing anyway. So without a heavy flow of traffic along this viaduct, it's uneconomic to keep it maintained. But it is kind of quite an epic structure. And something absolutely out of the ordinary for an ordinary a little border village, as it were. So that's where I'll wind up. I've probably droned on for long enough. I think the main thing to take away from village atlases is there are many stories that you can explore when you're doing them, and but there, you know, everyone can take part. There's, you know, there's different activities, and everyone can get involved in one or another. You know, if one happens in your area, please join in. And even two people like these.
Have you quite finished, Alan? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
You do one little pose with a teddy bear.
Yes.
I'd like, on behalf of everyone, can we just give Alan a brilliant round of applause for that?
Yes. Sorry, my mouse is going a little haywire. It's kind of developed a mind of its own, so it flashes around the screen a bit sometimes.
Don't worry, that's fine. If you want to stop sharing, the sooner the better, given the picture that you're showing.
Are you sure?
Yes, absolutely. Let's get rid of that one. Fantastic. Thank you for that, Alan. I can see why you can spend a year or 2 years in one place. How you managed to do 6 places in 6 months and condensed it, I have no idea. And you know, you could talk about each one for an hour. There's just so much to cover. So thank you for being able to distill that into an hour. That's really appreciated. I just wanted to mention, in terms of the selection for the location of these six locations. It was the way that we chose them wasn't just geographical spread, picked locations. We actually wanted to revisit sites that WallCAP had been to over the duration of the WallCAP programme. For example, some of the heritage at risk sites where we'd done geophysical survey or we'd done excavation. We wanted to go back to those communities and work with them to do the next thing, which was the village atlas work. So it wasn't just a sort of flash in the pan, new sort of just, you know, just turned up and did this work. We actually had some good connections with those locations before we went, with those communities before we went in. So this was a really nice way to then invite people to really get involved and get under the skin of their own village. I'm going to just, I know a couple of people raised hands, and I'm just going to quickly just look in the chat, see if there's any questions for you, Alan, and then we can open the floor. I know Andrea had a hand up, but I'll come back. I'll just do the ones in the chat because I did promise we'd do those first, and then we'll come back. So Alistair's asking, is the Village Atlas project nationwide? We've explained for WallCAP, but is this a methodology that you've seen across the country, Alan?
They have been done in other areas, I think. Yes, I mean, I think the first ones we did were for Northumberland National Park, and I think they were using a methodology they'd come across somewhere else, and you know, they sent that as that document. I think it might have been somewhere down in the East Midlands or somewhere, but I'm not familiar with village atlases from other regions. And the furthest we've gone with them is North Yorkshire. We did some there from Yorkshire Dales National Park, yeah, we've done quite a few in County Durham now and Northumberland, but these are the first ones we've done in Cumbria. So yeah, so that's been our reach. They're probably, I mean, it's a model which is easily replicable. So I'm sure there are ones elsewhere, but there, you know, there isn't a national program, as it were. I mean, you could create one that would feed into Victoria County history and this kind of thing, where they have kind of tried to create groups that do local research themselves, but it's never been, I mean, it's never been formalized in that way. And it would be a good way of perhaps giving some of these Victoria County history, you know, which are typically written by township and then parish. So it would be a good way of kind of giving it some oomph, and you could get lottery funding for it, you know, if you're in, you know, so potentially. So, but yes, it doesn't seem to have been rolled out, you know, it's kind of more sporadic. It's individual, you know, people apply for lottery funding for, you know, a group of atlases or whatever attached to a landscape partnership scheme and this kind of thing. It's typically how it works.
And I think what we found doing this along Hadrian's Wall is we've had other communities saying, can we get involved? Can we do one for our village? Which the answer is is sort of yes, but you sort of need to coordinate it and have the experts in to help do the research. So I think it is a methodology that it's been a bit of a pilot really to do it along the wall this year, and it seems to have been a success in terms of the participants who've got involved, and also the sort of product, the quality of the information and the atlases that will be produced in due course. Just going to finish the questions in the chat, because I did promise that was the quickest way to get your questions asked, and then we can open up the floor a little bit. So Paul, thanks for your questions, Paul. He says, sorry, no microphone to ask out loud. Hope this isn't too long. Firstly, love the project. Good start. A couple of questions on Gilsland. Surprised at the lack of medieval evidence and anything pre-early modern. It appears quite a lot in the steel bonnets records. So what was Fraser referring to there? Is Gilsland shorthand for something else?
Yes, well, Gilsland is an area. It's an area which really extends from the Irthing almost to Carlisle. It's a big, barony, basically. Pre-Norman in its origin, it's basically the land that Gilly, son of Buath, had held in the early to mid 12th century originally, and then it becomes an Anglo-Norman barony and so forth. I mean, there is the village that we call Gilsland is a later creation. It's a result of Walter Scott and the Newcastle and Carlisle Railway kind of colliding and dragging a lot of Victorian tourists along with them. But there are settlements there, and we have good evidence for them, but they're not village communities. They're very small hamlets, 2 or 3 farmsteads together, or even individual farmsteads. And we've got, there are the medieval records such as the Black Book of Hexham. Hexham Priory held land in Thirlwall Township, and so that mentions it. And it even gives the bounds of one of its holdings. And there's on the Cumbrian side, there's Lord Howard of Norworth, who acquires the Gilsland barony. He does a complete survey in the beginning of the 17th century, which is incredibly detailed. I mean, it has, it tells what each tenement is and who holds it and how much, what land they have and etc. And there are maps attached to that, although they're very, very difficult to reproduce because they're so faint. I think possibly water, there was an interaction with water at some unfortunate point, but they are, incredible. I mean, there is in fact an incredible data set for that area, because you've also got the Lanercost cartulary for the Cumbrian side as well. So you can, it's one or more PhDs in the making. I even hope to do one myself way back in a previous lifetime, or a postdoctoral study. But yes, so there, more work can be done, and there is a lot of evidence. But there isn't a village at Gilsland until the second half of the 19th century. That's the point I was trying to make.
Thanks for that. And then there's a second half to that question. And the reason, just for if anyone's wondering why I'm reading them out, it's because some people join us on iPads and they can't see the chat. So that's why I read them out. The secondary question from Paul is, what's the evidence for Gilly actually existing? I've read a bit about the 19th century Cumbrian antiquarian reports on him, but came away with a bit of a sense that he's as much of a later construct as anything. I think there may have been some other modern doubters too. Sorry, been a while since I did this work, so hazy on details.
Yes, I think, I mean, I've heard that as well, but I think he is, I think he does figure in some charter reference in Carlisle in, I think the 1120s or something like that. So I think he is a historical figure. Obviously his name fits, so it's possible he is a creation in that sense, but I do think he has, I mean, I was reading, very detailed account of relating to, what's happening in the area the other day, and he's mentioned in that, there's this reference to him being active in the 1120s. So I think he is a historical figure.
Thank you. And just to sort of go back to the previous answer, Paul sort of replied with surprising, the implication in Fraser's reference is of a specific place rather than just the barony. I wonder what Fraser's sources were actually saying. It'll be interesting to see your results. Thanks a lot. Another question, Hilary said, will the finished atlases be viewable in any electronic way?
Well, that's possibly up to our sponsors.
Then I think it's highly likely that we will make it accessible that way. The idea is that we do a print run based on, well, Alan, do you know what the print run is? Because you guys have got the whole commission.
No. We need to have a conversation with...
That's fine. There'll be a limited print run, so we can put some physical hard copies in those locations. And we'd like everyone who got involved with the test pitting, for example, to get a copy. And then over and above that, I think having electronic versions would be really nice. It's nice and accessible for people. So yeah, that's a conversation we can have. But if that's something that people think is a nice idea, then we'll take that on board. Okie doke. Any more questions in the chat? Otherwise, I'm going to ask people to... Nope, not in there. We are still recording, so if you feel uncomfortable asking a question, please don't. We can always edit you out if you don't want to be in the final recording. Catherine's our technical guru, she'll just edit out things like that. But if anyone feels comfortable and wants to raise a hand and unmute and ask a question, then now is your time to shine. Andrea, you had your hand up earlier. Was that a clap hand or was it a raised question?
Thank you very much, Kerry. It was partially the initial hand up was going to say that Alan's screen sharing wasn't working, but then I was going to ask equally Hilary's question about would we be able to access other things electronically, because in particular Benwell, where when we were first married we lived right over the temple and where they've done the digs recently, so that interests us, but also Gunnerton, where I spent all my holidays as a child, really interests me as well. So yeah, electronic versions would be fabulous, and of course for Heddon. And thank you very much for this evening. Absolutely super. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Of course, behind me.
Thanks, Andrew, as well. Lovely, thank you. Anybody else like to ask any questions? Please just put your screen on or raise an emoji hand, or if you've got your screen on, raise your actual hand. I can't see if you haven't got your screen on and you do raise your hand. Oh, Alistair, you look like you're going to jump into action. Yep.
Yeah, I was interested in the test pit idea. Was that done in every location, or only you mentioned Walton, I think, which would be good because it's got a green and everything. But I mean, you said you were trying to find the line of the wall in Byker. Was that by test pitting?
Yes, we did do test pitting in every village. The format we used varied. It depends on what was available, really. Yeah, so we dug some test pits just next to the ship in Byker, where the wall is thought to come down that slope. And in Benwell, we dug in two areas. One's kind of on the south row of what would have been the medieval village, and also quite close to where we dug on the Dorcas Avenue excavations. But the little playground there, you know, because there's the bathhouse, which I showed a plan of, that is kind of in that kind of range from the Roman fort. So the idea was that we might just, if we were extremely lucky, we might catch it there. But in fact, we got a lot of, you know, there's obviously been leveling up and things. We got a lot of colliery waste and stuff dumped down. We weren't getting down to natural subsoil at all there. In Heddon, we dug in people's gardens, so it was which is more that's kind of methodology which has been used quite a bit and has been used nationally in in various research programs into medieval villages, which have involved digging in, and if you do it enough, you get a complete sample across the entire village, and that's what we were doing in Heddon, and we ironically, although Gilsland isn't a medieval settlement in origin, that's kind of what we were doing there. I mean, there are, there is the odd, obviously there's the mill building, but it was just to see what kind of stuff we might get there. And Walton we were in the green because it was easiest, we were working with the school there, so it was easiest to have them in one area. And Bowness as well. We did a scatter right in people's gardens around the village. So Heddon, Bowness, and Gilsland are kind of the typical village, medieval village exploration methodology that test pitting has been used for, and the others were more targeted.
So even in Bowness, you didn't get any Roman at all in your test pits, or did you get anything? You would have expected that to be the best.
We would have hoped for it. I think we might have got the odd sherd. Yes, we might have got the odd sherd. Yes, we need to.
And you mentioned the Mile Castle at Walton, which seems incredibly elusive.
Yes,
you didn't.
When the maps first start out, they're confident they know where it is. McLaughlin marks it. The first edition order of the survey marks it, but it's never been found in any trenching or anything. Not that I think a great deal's been done there, but it's become less and less. Now they don't even mark it as a square on the map. It must be somewhere in the area because it's just on spacing, and it's a pronounced kink in the line of the wall. So the assumption has been that it must be there, but yes, people have become less and less confident in marking it, on the map. So it'll probably turn up next year. Yeah.
Right, thanks very much.
Thanks, Alistair. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Kerry. Can I ask Alan, please, how does one access the Howard archives? Because they don't keep them in the Carlisle Archive Centre.
No, I mean, they are. I think the transactions of the Cumberland and Westmoreland Society produced a kind of edited version of his survey. I mean, I've got a copy. I think it was, what does it say? Yeah, Barony of Gilsland. Yeah, it was. So it was their extra series, volume 16. So if you can get hold of that, then you can, try AB books, or the society might still. I mean, certainly they might. The archives might have if they have a library attached, they should have a copy there. So that gives you the survey. The maps are in Carlisle record, archives, and we have obtained copies. How easy they are, how well they'll show up if we try to reproduce them is a different matter. The really old ones, very faint, and it's kind of north is on the bottom, on the map, so it's a bit of a mind meld to looking at it, but yeah, the maps are certainly there.
Yeah, the barony of Gilsland and Bruff, they were together. Bruff Sands.
Yes, they ended up together. Yes, there was a kind of, they weren't originally, but there's a kind of the Dacres basically gobbled up a huge amount, and then they fall foul of Elizabeth I at some point, and only hold on to a small fraction, and Lord Howard gets the lion's share. So there is, there's a kind of rationalisation of northern baronies that goes on there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Alistair, you're still unmuted. Were you wanting to add anything to that?
Well, I have a little bit of information on the Naworth archives, because they were originally deposited at Durham, not actually Durham University, and they then, for some reason, went to Carlisle, where I thought they were in the record office. But you seem to have better information. There was, but may no longer be, a full catalogue of them on the Durham Archives and Special Collections site, which would at least let you know what was in it, and there may be something comparable on the Cumberland, the Cumbria Record Office site. But there is a full catalogue. Although, as I say, I'm not entirely sure where that might be. And you were also saying that the documents themselves are not accessible. Is that the case? It's just the maps that they've got?
I think they have actually. I think they have got all the documents. I mean, I haven't looked for the survey, because the original copies of the survey, because we already have a printed account. They certainly
Right.
have the maps, and yes, they did travel. They did travel from Durham. When I first looked at those maps, which was 20 odd years ago, or even more, they were in Durham. And so, you know, it's kind of, I thought they, you know, I hadn't realized when we first started this that they had moved to Carlisle. So I did, yes, I have actually, now you remind me, I have seen them in the, or some of them, I mean, and they also have some stuff for Northumberland as well, because he held, Lord Howe held land in Heddon as well, and also Thirlwall and places like that. And there's some of their records, but not some is in Northumberland, but some is still in Carlisle, which is kind of slightly awkward, you know. It's kind of for those areas, those Northumberland areas. So they haven't done a complete divvy up with Northumberland archives or anything.
Oh, right.
Yes, for the Heddon estate and for the Thirlwall estate, there's bits in both archives as far as I can gather. But the Cumbrian stuff should all be in Carlisle.
I never really understood why they ended up in Durham, because I don't think that family had any property in County Durham historically that I know of.
No, I think it may have been. I think I did read something about this, and there may have been some sort of covenant in the thing that it was. Because Durham does hold a lot of other medieval archives, and maybe they thought we should go there, you know, when they finally got rid of it. But yeah, they've obviously thought better of it since.
It seems a more logical place to put it in Carlisle.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Thanks, Alistair. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Alan for all the work you've done on the Village Atlas project for WallCAP. It's phenomenal, the amount of research that you personally, as well as the rest of the team, have done to make this work.